Today is Thanksgiving, and Mets fans this year, we have a lot to be thankful for.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you Mets fans out there. This is a great time of year. We get to reflect on all the blessings in our life, our friends, our family, and for a lot of us now, the New York Mets. It was a remarkable season in 2024 that came up just short of a World Series appearance. But what I want to do here is I want to really reflect on where we were as Mets fans at the end of May and then what we ended up getting. And I'm not going to go through the whole story about the players meeting, 11 games under. I want to more focus on how low we were at the end of May. If you think about the roller coaster ride we have been on in the Steve Cohen era from 2021, great first half, tail off entirely, first real full off season where Steve Cohen flexes those financial muscles and he brings in Max Scherzer and Marte and Canna and Escobar, and all of a sudden this team is primed and ready to go, and they got Buck Showalter at the helm, and the Mets won 101 games, and they made the playoffs, and it seemed like the franchise was on a steady climb up. They build off of that. They go out, they spend like crazy. They bring in Verlander and Senga and bring back Nimmo and Diaz, and it just seems like the Mets are primed to be this new big bad wolf, this new team that is able to just buy all the best players, and they are going to be a team to be reckoned with that's going to win World Series, and everything's great. Then 2023 happens, and it was an absolute dumpster fire, and all of the wind that was in the Mets sails just completely dissipated. And we were left as Mets fans thinking, here we go again. Is this franchise cursed? Can they ever figure it out? What an absolute disaster. How could a team that had such positive momentum, that on paper was so talented, fall so very flat? David Stearns takes over, and that gives you a little glimmer of hope. But the Mets didn't go crazy last offseason. And you thought, all right, maybe Stearns made some shrewd moves. Maybe it's all going to pay off and the Mets can actually be relevant throughout the season. And they get to the end of May, 2 months in, and it looks like another disaster of a season. And a team that cratered in 2023 with a 7-19 month of June started the month of May 7-19. Then magic happens. Francisco Lindor has an MVP season. Jose Iglesias is the most unbelievable role player that I might have ever seen. And it's a whole crazy saga that we just never could have anticipated. Here we were in June, if I'm not mistaken, not that far after the downs of May, and Grimace is chugging beer during a rain delay to a crazy crowd at Citi Field. It's just a year that we're going to look back on 5-10 years from now and reflect and think, how did all of that happen? And hopefully it's the start of a great decade of Mets baseball. But just thinking about what 2024 was, it is so remarkable to see Mark Vientos have the breakout that he did. David Peterson had the breakout that he did. To see you get insane production relative to contracts that were signed from Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, and even Jose Quintana, to get those three guys to pitch the way they did, to carry a rotation. I mean, nobody would have thought that trio would have been one of the best trios of starting pitchers in baseball. But really, you look at it, and they were. And then you get all of these incredible moments in the playoffs. Pete Alonso. I mean, thank you, Pete, seriously, for everything you've done in a Mets uniform throughout your career, and saving the best for last with that huge home run against Devin Williams to advance the Mets to the NLDS. To then the Mets, beating the Phillies in 4 and clinching an NLCS appearance at home at Citi Field. First time they were ever able to pop champagne and celebrate in the history of Citi Field. Brandon Nimmo for continuing to be an all-time great Met, which is a crazy thing to say for those of us who have followed his career since the beginning. But you're looking at a guy that's going to end his career in a Mets uniform, and he's going to have, his name high up in the list of a lot of records just because of spending his whole career with the Mets and turning himself into a really good starting player. And just overall, the collection of guys that came together and were able to give this fan base so much feel good in 2024. It's not something that should be taken lightly, especially for us Mets fans who have gone through so many down years. This was my 6th season, I believe, covering the New York Mets on this podcast. 2019 was my first year, and it was a fun one. Pete Alonso's rookie season. The Mets had a shot to make the playoffs. They came up short. 2020 was an utter disaster. 2021 became a disappointment. 2022, a lot of fun, but a really bad ending. And then we already went through what happened in 2023. So you really look at my 6 seasons covering this team, and there's not a question that this was the best one. And I will be eternally grateful, honestly, for this season because it was just such a fun ride. I learned a lot about myself in doing this show too, from going every day from the middle of May until the end of the season. And I just recently, I'm doing interviews right now. I'm hiring some writers for Just Baseball, and one of the kids I was talking to was asking me about Locked On Mets and the grind. And I said, look, ultimately there are times where it is a grind. Don't get me wrong. There's times, this year where I was committed to doing a show every day and I'm on vacation and been out all day and I'm tired and everyone else is asleep, but I'm staying up to do a show. And those nights, yeah, maybe it was a little bit of a grind, but when I'm home and I'm here just watching the Mets and coming on and doing a show at the end of each night, it's not a grind. It might be a lot of work. It might be a lot of hours, but I sincerely love what I do. And when you have a team like this one, that was so much fun to cover, it's not hard. And it is just an absolute joy. And now as we sort of turn the page and look ahead, because Thanksgiving just happens to take place at a time where you are literally sort of closing the book on 2024. 2025 is right around the corner, and the moves that are going to be made that are going to lay the blueprint for what's ahead are about to be made. I mean, Juan Soto could be signed next week for all we know. The New York Mets are in an absolutely great position moving forward, and that's what I want to talk about in the next segment here to close things out on Thanksgiving. Why we have a lot to be thankful for, not just for what we just saw, but for what we're about to see with the New York Mets. We'll talk about that in a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL. It's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet, but you want to bet on something you're confident in, so you get that $150 in bonus bets. I might have faith that the Giants are going to beat the Cowboys today on Thanksgiving. I'll be watching. I'm not going to throw $5 on that when I got $150 in bonus bets on the line. Make sure you pick something you know you're going to win so that you get those bonus bets. That's all at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. We're getting real close to that goal. Just hit that red button. Well, you look at the road ahead here for the New York Mets, and here's what I'll tell you. Between Juan Soto, Corbin Burns, Max Fried, Pete Alonso, Willy Adames, the New York Mets are going to sign one of those 5 guys, I believe, over the next couple of weeks. They're not going to stop there. This is a really exciting time to be a Mets fan. And we got Steve Cohen to be thankful for when it comes to that, because if the Wilpons still own this team, we would not be sitting here talking about the New York Mets being big spenders. We would not have watched the Mets year over year here put up a payroll over $300 million. And with Steve Cohen, the Mets as an organization have transformed from one that was never a free agent destination to one that I think free agents really want to go play for. An organization that now has a great infrastructure in place. They had a signing today, Genesis Cabrera, a minor league deal. And Genesis Cabrera is a left-handed pitcher who pitched to a sub-4 ERA this past year, over 60 innings pitched. Now, if you look at the underlying data, there is some things that would maybe point to why he wouldn't have had widespread interest to get a major league contract. But the Mets are able to sign him on a minor league deal as a guy, again, who was in a big league bullpen all year and had a good ERA, because they now have an infrastructure in place that pitchers in particular are going to gravitate towards. And you have to credit Steve Cohen for investing in this organization, investing in building a pitching lab. You have to credit Jeremy Hefner and all the pitching coaches that were able to get such great seasons out of guys like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino to make the Mets more of that destination for Reed Garrett to have the leap that he took this year. These are things that other pitchers are going to take notice of, and they're going to flock to the Mets. And you have to credit David Stearns for being able to identify talent and be able to get guys like this to sign on minor league deals. And you might think, man, we're talking about a minor league deal on Thanksgiving. What are we doing? But to me, it is just one example of many where the Mets are now a destination where free agents are going to want to come play. And that's going to start at the top of the market. And hopefully it is Juan Soto. And it's going to go all the way on to the minor league deals where you can get a Jose Iglesias to come sign with the Mets on a minor league contract. And all of a sudden that signing turns into one of the biggest reasons you make the playoffs and have the season that you did in 2024. David Stearns is one of the best executives in the sport. And I see all the time the comments on YouTube and on social media about mini market Stearns and he doesn't want to spend. And I ask you fans to be patient, because David Stearns is not going to spend recklessly, but he's going to spend. Okay. You look at what he has done in his career, and you look at the Milwaukee Brewers, who have owned the NL Central. David Stearns is the one most responsible for the Brewers' success. He wouldn't say that, but a lot of people in the industry would. And yes, Matt Arnold could be a great executive. They're the guy that took over for Stearns. He might be. But David Stearns was the one that laid the foundation. And I think in sports and baseball in particular, there's a couple of things that you need to be successful as a franchise. And a great executive can overcome, I think, the most important thing, which is having a great owner. A great owner sets the tone for everything. But you can get around a bad owner if you have a great executive. And now the Mets have both. And beyond that, if you're just looking at the leadership of this club moving forward, thank you to Craig Counsell for not taking the Mets job and opening the door for Carlos Mendoza to be the Mets manager. And he had a great first season. If you include the playoffs, I think he would have been the NL manager of the year, but obviously that voting takes place before the playoffs. So Pat Murphy won it, even though Mendoza was the manager that knocked Murphy's team out of the playoffs. But with the leadership that the Mets have, from owner to president to manager, and then to the superstar, to Francisco Lindor, who's clearly still in his prime, has, at least in my opinion, 5 really good seasons ahead of him, where the New York Mets will have a window to win a World Series with one of, if not the best shortstop in baseball. Bobby Witt Jr. was the best shortstop in 2024. Corey Seager was the best shortstop in 2023. Go back to 2022, it might have been Trey Turner. I'm not exactly sure. I have to look at the numbers. Actually, it might have been Dansby Swanson for all we know. But the bottom line, actually, Correa had a good year that year as well. But the bottom line, though, if you look at the last decade, Francisco Lindor has been the best shortstop. And I would think over the next 5 years, there's a good chance Lindor continues to be the best shortstop for what he brings to the table. And he learned how to lead this year. Tangibly learned how to take a team, how to be the voice, how to be the heartbeat, and get a group of guys to rally around him. And part of it was putting the team on its back a lot of times. The Mets have an infrastructure in place that, I'm going to knock on wood, but I feel like it's too big to fail long term. You might have a bad season here and there, but with the ownership in place, $300+ million payrolls every year if it's required, to an executive that has shown he knows how to win and get teams in the playoffs, to great players that are still in place, a farm system that's improving. I honestly believe the best days are ahead for the New York Mets, and that's something that fans really have to be thankful for. So as we get to Thanksgiving today, it's a time to look back at the year that we just had and be thankful for 2024 and what the Mets brought us as fans, and to think towards 2025 and be thankful for the journey that we're about to go on, because 2025 and every baseball season, it's a marathon that really starts around now. This is the point in time where moves start to be made. The Blake Snell signing yesterday was the first big domino to fall, but there's a lot more to come throughout this offseason. The next 5-6 weeks in particular, you're going to see great movement around the league, and that's going to create great excitement. And the Mets should be at the forefront of a lot of it, and I'll be covering it all in this show, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun this offseason to see where the Mets land. And moving forward, I really do think the best Mets baseball is ahead of us as fans. And you think about where we were years ago when the Wilpons were in charge, it just would not have been possible. I don't think that I would be at the point in my career that I am right now if Steve Cohen didn't buy the New York Mets. I don't think so. I don't know if I'd still be delivering pizza, but maybe not as many hours, but I think I might be a little bit. I really don't know. And that leads me to what I like to do every Thanksgiving, which is thank you, the listener or the watcher on YouTube. Because without you guys, I would not have the most amazing career. And it's just so humbling, honestly. When I get those messages from the listeners that tell me that I'm the first thing they do each morning, they tune into the show and they walk their dog, or they go for a run like my dad does, or they drive their kids to school. And I mean, that's even cooler when I hear that there's like going to be generations of Locked On Mets listeners, as there's kids who are getting Locked On Mets forced on them the way I got the Mets forced on me, like I'm sure a lot of you did when you were kids. And fandom is being formed, and for me to be part of that fandom for some of the young kids, it's just so cool that this show has been going on now, and I'm going on my 7th season. I'm going to blink and it's going to be a decade of Locked On Mets, and I can't wait for decades of Locked On Mets, honestly. I hope I'm doing this show until I have horrible takes and I got gray hair and people are calling me a gas bag, and I'm like Mike and the Mad Dog, who are still somehow both doing it. And I hope I get that type of a career out of this. But man, right now I'm just so blessed to have now 6 seasons of Locked On Mets under my belt. 2022 Thanksgiving, we celebrated 1 million listens on the audio side for the first time. It was a really awesome moment for me. Last year, it was New Year's, pretty much, where the YouTube channel crossed over to 1 million views in a year for the first time. And this year at Thanksgiving, we have far surpassed both of those numbers on both the audio side and the YouTube side. We might hit 3 million combined between both if the Mets do some crazy stuff and we have a big December ahead of us on this show. And that's just remarkable to me, because I remember when I started this thing and it was a hobby. It was just another thing I was doing. I was more focused on writing about basketball and football. But life takes some crazy turns, and COVID happened, and my sports writing job on football and basketball went away, and delivering pizza went away. And I just recorded Locked On Mets every single day. And by the time I gotten back to delivering pizza again and getting a little bit, towards the other side of COVID, where all of a sudden the show actually started to be something that was legit and kind of growing somewhere. And then the YouTube was on the horizon, and that scared the heck out of me, because I've always been a shy guy, was never very confident, and to think that I'd be on camera every day was out of this world. There's no chance I would have seen myself doing this thing, but here we are a couple years later, and everything I have in my life with what I'm building here as I look towards a future with my wife and maybe having a family someday and all this stuff. And I think about what lies ahead for me, to be able to talk about the New York Mets every night on this show, and then to write about baseball and manage a staff of writers at Just Baseball. I got a lot to be thankful for, and I just always want to take the time whenever we get to a holiday like this to show appreciation for those who have helped me get to this point. So thank you to the Locked On Podcast Network for keeping me in this seat. Thank you to Just Baseball for everything we're doing over there. Thank you to the listeners of this show, the readers of the articles that I write. And of course, the last thank you all know who've been listening for a while knows who that goes to. That's my dad, for making me a crazy Mets fan, making me a diehard, and for showing me the way throughout my life. I cannot wait to spend Thanksgiving dinner with you later today, and hope that you're enjoying your walk with Hershey right now, or your run, Dad. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I'll have another show for you tomorrow. Not quite sure what we're talking about yet. Might be some prospect stuff, might be some free agent stuff, but I will definitely have a show for you. And we'll keep things rolling as the offseason is sure to heat up once we get to the other side of this holiday. As always, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. It covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today, with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.